when the commissions are removed from your local MLS is you're gonna get bombarded with text messages, phone calls, emails, Facebook messages, and probably birds with letters to verify that what they have agreed to pay you with their buyer agency commission is going to be represented in some way, shape, or form by the listing agent, some portion of it, with the buyer's agent commission. You will be able to go to our website or go to your app on your phone and search that property and verify what commission is being offered to the buyer's agent, just as we do already with the MLS. The reason that we're able to do this is because we are non-affiliated. So we do not receive any IDX fees from MLSs. We have a private third-party database where the agents and the sellers have the opportunity to sign up for an account and to input their listings via third party. Does that make sense? Perfect. I know that's the most confusing part about what we're offering. So we already have a legal team, we have an IT team, we are first to market, and we are very excited to offer this convenient solution to our agents. We are offering it for a very inexpensive rate right now. We have an exclusive opportunity for our Raleigh members to get our software through the end of June for $7.95 per month. Does anyone pay for any software that's as cheap as $8 per month? Show of hands. Great. I know I pay for Regrid, but it's $9.99, so I wanted to beat them. But I'm going to hand it over to Phil, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about our app and our website and some of the back-end things that we are implementing, and then I'm going to speak more about some of the amenities in addition to searching properties and commissions that we have for our agents.
Thank you, Alexa. So as far as the app and the website goes, like Alexa said, agents and sellers will be able to go on and post their commissions that are going to be offered. On the back end of the website, the agents are also able to make a profile where you're able to put your range and commission that you're offering, as well as the amenities that you're offering to your clients. So clients can go onto the website and search for agents, and they'll be able to see that all agents are made the same. So if your range of whatever you charge for sellers or buyers is X amount, then they'll be able to see that you do a appraisal for them, or you give them the sign, and you give them the lockbox and all the extra things that you might do if you do drone footage or whatever it is, so you can help differentiate yourself from other agents. On top of that, inside the app, agents are also able to do DocuSign, DigiSign, Transaction Desk, and several other services as well to get that buyer's agency agreement signed, and as well as the confirmation and compensation form signed on the go before you get to do that showing with the agent. Additionally, the other thing in the site, we're giving away a vacation today. Anybody that signs up will be able to give away vacations to their clients as well as a closing gift. And it only costs you anywhere from $25 to $35 per day that the client goes away, or you can have the client pay the taxes on the room. There's no timeshare presentations or any of that kind of stuff, no fine print or anything like that. And then our applications will be coming out within the next 30 days. Our website is live now. We do have about 10,000 listings currently on the site, as well as 60,000 agent profiles as well. And then agents can go on when you sign up, claim your profile, claim any listings that you have if we already have them on, and input your listings. As far as inputting the listings on the site, we know that real estate agents have a ton of paperwork to do, and it takes a long time to put things to MLS and all the other things that you do. So it's literally 4 things that you put in. You put in the address of the property, the price of the property, the commission you're offering, and then the MLS number, which is optional. And then if you want to add a photo, you can, just one picture. We do have the opportunity as well to have the listings be compensation verified, where you can upload, as the listing agent, you can upload that confirmation and compensation form into the system. It'll have a little check mark next to it saying that it's been verified. And then once it's verified, any buyer's agents that are looking at your property, they're able to just get that form signed, and then they know that they're covered. That's pretty much it for the current features that we have on the site. We have a lot more coming. And I'll have Alexa talk about the rest of the stuff we have.
All right, so as Phil said, it's being offered for $7.95 per month right now. Typically our price is $29.95 per month with a $49 sign-up fee per agent. We're actually waiving the sign-up fee completely, so it's a $0 sign-up fee, and then we're offering that $7.95 per month. Your next question to me is probably going to be, does that expire in 60 days? We're actually guaranteeing that for a lifetime. So no matter how much we grow and how big we get, this is a national website. So we have more than North Carolina in there. Every agent across the United States is going to be able to use it. Think of it as the new Zillow, the new Realtor.com, the new Homes.com. But you will get it for $7.95 per month with no sign-up fee if you sign up before the end of June and you use our special code for Raleigh. If you have any questions about what we're doing, please come see us at our table. We don't have any swag right now. We've been working hard to develop these secure and encrypted software and app So we have been really busy with that. We've invested a lot of our own money into this. We think it's a viable solution for agents and consumers to have truth and transparency, and to offer commission ranges, and to know that all commissions forever have been negotiable, but everyone should be able to see what the other side is being paid, consumers and agents alike. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, y'all. Next, I'm sure everyone knows this fabulous lady, Heather Thompson, Executive Director with Realtor Giving Network.
Good morning. Good morning, beautiful souls. I'm Heather, and I am so lucky to be able to be the Executive Director of the Realtor Giving Network. It really is a joy and privilege every day to get working with realtors to help our unhoused neighbors. So if you have ever given to the network with your heart, with your time, or with your resources, raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So next time, everybody's going to raise their hand because you're going to be so enthralled with what we're doing. We are the collective giving arm of the association, so when you make an investment, we're going to be able to say yes to a nonprofit that calls us for funding. This year, we're going to give away $150,000. My goal was one day to give away $1 million, and we're going to get there for sure. I have a quick story to tell you. Just yesterday, we got 2 requests, one for Ms. Harris and one for Blake. They are living, one with asthma and one undergoing chemo treatments with no AC. Okay, so today it's quite steamy, really dangerously hot. So what's going to happen is by lunchtime, 2 realtors are going to come here and they're going to pick up a window AC unit and they're going to deliver it to these 2 individuals. And guess what? Nobody else in town. Wake County is very well resourced, but guess who they called? They called realtors, because you do it all the time for your clients. You come to the rescue, and we're going to do that today. So I have a charge for you all, or an invitation. If everybody would consider texting on the cute little card you have, $10, and what that's going to do is it's going to pay for those 2 AC units today. So on that card it says giver, and then it has the text number. More than anything, thank you all for what you do to put people in houses, and thank you for the opportunity to do it together to help our unhoused neighbors transition from homelessness to stable housing and take good care.
Thank you, Heather. I would also like to give a shout out to Peak City Coffee. They are outside at a networking table. They'd love to say hello to you all. They provide awesome closing gifts. I would also like to recognize any of the RRAR leadership team in the room. Could you all please stand? President Tim McBrayer, Clara, thank you. Are there any RPAC major investors in the room? May I please ask you to stand for acknowledgement? Thank you so much. Last but not least, I would like to introduce you to the panelists. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for the time that you've put into this and helping our members learn more about this upcoming change from NAR. First, I would like to introduce Renee Hillman. She is with EXP, team founder of Hillman Real Estate Group. Next to Renee is Brian Hourigan, owner and broker in charge of Choice Real Estate. Next, you have Executive Vice President, Regional Sales Manager, Atlantic Bay Mortgage Group, Nelda Kales. And with Sterling Law, closing attorney, David Clapsadl. Welcome. And our moderator for today, also with Sterling Law, Nathan Zaleski.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. So my name is Nathan Zaleski. I'm a managing partner at Sterling Law, and as you know, we are partnered with the association, the Diamond Sponsors Association, and we do various events during the year. And what the events are, just they change, and it really is dependent upon what's important to agents at that time, what is going on in the market. And right now, everybody top of mind is this NAR settlement and the implementation of this NAR settlement. So a lot of you coming in here today probably have, by show of hands, how many people have confusion about what the NAR settlement is all about and how this is going to be implemented? Okay, for those of you who didn't raise your hands, you're just being modest. Everybody, has some confusion about this, and we are dealing in uncertain times. So if you are feeling like, gee, I'm just not sure about how this is all gonna work out, you're with everybody else, okay? So the first message is just to be calm, you know, we are gonna get through this. The panel that we've assembled today are all industry veterans in their own right. We have every different, you know, facet of the industry, and they are, you know, very, very knowledgeable and gonna have some great insights. With that said, before we jump into it, Jay Nelson, our communications director, he's gonna go ahead and take care of some of the legal side of this and give us our antitrust statement. Here you go. Glad I get to give this to you.
Thank you, Nathan. All right, good morning, everybody. It's a great turnout. Thank you to everybody for coming out. This is, like we said, an important topic to a lot of realtors as far as what's next. But part of that, we're gonna do a little bit of legality to make sure that everything that we do is, you know, we're being very careful. So let me run through this real quick, and then we'll turn it over to our panel and our moderator here. RRAR serves as a forum for a free and open discussion of diverse opinions without any way attempting to encourage or sanction any particular business practice. RRAR is not organized for the purposes and may not play any role in the competitive decisions of our members, nor in any way restrict competition among members or potential members. We provide a forum for exchange of ideas in a variety of settings, including today's panel discussion. This statement supports the policy of competition served by the antitrust laws and to communicate RRAR's policy to comply with all respects of those antitrust laws. To ensure that RRAR and our members comply with antitrust laws, the following procedures will be observed today. Discussions and exchanges of information among 2 or more members, looks like we have 2 or more today, and other competitors with regard to prices or terms and conditions of contracts for services or products will not be permitted. This includes discussion of specific commission rates, discussions that discourage or withhold patronage or services from or encouraging exclusive dealings with any supplier or group will not be permitted. The speakers of today's discussion have been informed, yes? Yes. Yes. That they must comply with RRAR's antitrust policy in the preparation and presentation of their remarks. So with all that said, let's have a very lively conversation. Y'all enjoyed today's event. Let's turn it back over to Nathan. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you. So, we handed out the NAR settlement requirements, 10 practice changes for real estate brokers. I'm sure a lot of you have heard a lot about some of the changes that are coming. Some of you might just kind of be tuning in. The settlement agreement itself goes on for hundreds of, like over 100 pages. So we have provided you with just like the top 10 things that are coming. We're just handing this out for those of you who just want to kind of know what exactly is what we're talking about, the changes that are coming down the pipeline. So that's there for you. I'm not going to read it to you, but that's there for your information. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and hear from the panel. Let's go ahead and get right into it. So my first question is going to be for David. So David, you know, we're here to talk about the implementation of the NAR settlement. So for those of us that have not been tracking all these lawsuits going on all across the country, can you please give us some context here? Tell us about the litigation that led up to where we are today.
Sure. So litigation resulted in the settlement actually started about 5 years ago. There was a lawsuit that was filed in the Western District of Missouri. It was a federal lawsuit. It had some individuals that had listed their home on the MLS. They sued. That lawsuit later turned into what we call a class action lawsuit. That lawsuit, when it becomes certified as a class action, basically means that there are potentially multiple litigants out there. It'd be cumbersome for the courts to hear all these different claims, and so it gets certified into one class. Litigation went on for about 4.5 years. October of last year, there was a trial that was held. And on Halloween Day of October 23, the jury got basically the opportunity to deliberate on this. They spent a whopping 2.5 hours deliberating on their decision, and they came back and found that the defendants were liable for what they call Sherman antitrust violations. Okay? And they awarded $1.8 billion, with a B, billion, in damages. If you're sitting there going, what is a Sherman antitrust act violation? It's pretty simple. There's some sort of agreement or contract that unreasonably restrains trade or competition that affects interstate commerce. Okay? That's all you have to prove. The agreement doesn't have to be something that is in writing between two individuals. It can be a wink and a nod. You understand what we mean, right? And you're kind of nudging. The lawsuit was a kind of a Russian nesting doll of how they constructed this thing. Basically, the argument was, you've got these brokerages that are sitting out there. Yes, they're truly competitors, but they've all agreed to operate under NAR and the MLS rules. And the MLS rule had, at the time, a mandatory compensation rule, mandatory offer of compensation. And that was kind of the linchpin of how they tied this whole thing together. And so, essentially, the verdict comes down, NAR and the defendants kind of took a look at it and said, you know, what do we want to do here? Ultimately, they reached the settlement agreement. That settlement was announced March of this year. The settlement is not final yet, okay? There are practice changes that are being implemented as of August of this year, but the final court order is not scheduled to actually happen until November of this year. So the settlement is in place. It's not finalized just yet, but it's hopefully coming down the pipeline here soon. So in anticipation of those changes, that's where all these practice changes came about, and that's kind of how we got here.
Okay. Litigation all over the country affects us here in North Carolina.
Correct. Well, that was part of the reason of the settlement was you were having, you know, this one lawsuit took place. It was the Western District of Missouri. They were starting to pop up all over the country, and so essentially, in order to kind of head those things off, that's why the settlement was reached.
Very good. So next question, Brian. You know, you are the owner of a brokerage with, you know, pushing 200 agents or so. I'm sure you must be getting tons of questions from your agents about the settlement. One of the key aspects of this settlement agreement is that sellers cannot offer on MLS that the seller will pay a buyer's agent. This is raising the prospect of buyers possibly paying their own agent. So the question is, how is this impacting the conversation that an agent has when trying to establish an agency relationship with a buyer?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to know is that just because a seller doesn't offer compensation proactively, so if none of us have a crystal ball, so mine isn't working any better than anybody else's here, but if it turns out that there's a situation where a seller is not offering compensation proactively, I think the first thing just conceptually for agents to know is that that doesn't mean the seller won't actually pay compensation to a buyer's agent. It just means it's not being offered proactively. In other words, the seller isn't setting the value for that buyer's agent. The buyer agent is going to set that value and ask for that compensation. So I think that's just an important concept to understand, is that's a way that this could play out. So in terms of, to your question, how it impacts the way an agent would have a conversation with a buyer, I think for a lot of agents and a lot of the conversations I have with our agents, it's really not going to change much because they've already had detailed and transparent conversations about that part of our agency agreement. So they're already talking about what their compensation is, who's responsible for paying it, and what the different possible scenarios and outcomes are. So maybe that compensation is being paid by the seller or a listing agent, maybe part of it is, maybe none of it is, and what are the outcomes of that, what are the implications to their buyer client in those situations. So a lot of agents are already having that conversation, have been having that conversation for 10 or 15 or 20 years already, right? We've had conversation in our agency agreements for a long time here. For most agents in the room, probably your entire career, compensation has been in your buyer agency agreements. For agents who haven't been having that level of conversation, I think it does change a little bit for those agents. They now can't just gloss over that section and make the assumption automatically that compensation is always going to be paid by the seller or listing agent. They have to actually talk to the buyer about that section of your buyer agency agreement, right? So I think getting really comfortable with having that conversation, not having your palms get sweaty, right? Having practiced it before you're actually sitting on the phone or at the table with a prospective buyer client, I think that becomes really important. I think conceptually, agents need to treat buyers like we have always treated sellers, right? You get a phone call from a prospective seller, you've always asked them questions, set an appointment, and then thoroughly prepared for that appointment because you knew you were going to have to go in and establish your value and then ask to get paid for that value. So I think now agents need to make the transition if they haven't already been doing it this way and treat buyers like sellers. Prepare for that appointment. Well, first set an appointment, right? Actually have a buyer consultation. Try to make that the standard practice, and then treat them like you would a seller. Convey your value, ask for compensation. The logistics of how you get compensated may or may not change. Again, don't have the crystal ball, right? We know that the compensation is not going to be in the MLS, but that's the only thing we really know, right? So there will be some logistical changes, maybe an extra form or two that we might use. But we don't know that anything about the process, the efficiency of the process is really going to change in that regard. And by the way, I gave myself some notes to make sure I hit on the point. So let me just make sure. Oh, all right. So one other thing as it pertains, I didn't want to go down any rabbit trails that I didn't really intend to. So one other thing, which agents will need to, of course, talk to the broker charges or brokerage leadership about this, but there is a form that many agents have probably never looked at before, maybe not since pre-licensing anyway, and that is form number 203, which is a non-exclusive buyer agency agreement. This is a form that you should get with your leadership on and make sure you understand and that you are comfortable using this or that your brokerage is comfortable with you using it. But this is kind of, there's a requirement now to have a written agreement with a buyer before showing them a property, right? Well, there will be come, August 17th, presumably. This is the form North Carolina provides and has always provided that can accomplish that. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that form, but that is the vehicle right now that we have in North Carolina that is a standard North Carolina form that allows you to meet the terms of the settlement and still set some guidelines for how you're going to work with that buyer. So I think agents, in terms of practice changes, agents need to learn and understand that form forwards and backwards and get with their, lean into their broker in charge and brokerage on how they can utilize that form. I think just the last thought is just kind of conceptually here that when you're thinking about your buyers, there's a reason why modern real estate has existed the way it does, right? Market forces are always going to be pushing towards market efficiency. And I think we have that in a lot of respects. So the settlement is encouraging new things like just, in North Carolina, a lot of it doesn't change anyway, but encouraging transparency, reinforcing the fact that commissions are negotiable. So some things that the settlement is doing is certainly a good thing. But the market is going to continue to push towards efficiency. And so while we don't know how this is going to play out on August 17th, chances are August 17th of 2025 is going to look a lot different than August 17th of 2024. So, I think I wouldn't panic. I would embrace the fact that we just don't know exactly how it's going to work out. But the way that real estate transactions have come together for, again, all of modern real estate, there's a reason why it moved in that direction and why commissions or compensation has been structured a certain way. And it's not illogical to think that we will reestablish that efficient marketplace. There's just going to be some new logistics on how we do that. So.
We're going to have Q&A at the end, okay? Because I'm sure there's tons of questions, and hopefully many of them get answered as we go through it. You mentioned buyer agency. One of the aspects of the settlement agreement, was, buyer agency, and there are some states that did not have buyer agency at all. Now, that's not North Carolina, so we are actually very fortunate that for us, we're not having to do this heavy lift of completely redoing how we do real estate, so we're actually better situated than a lot of other states. That just gives you sort of a little perspective on the national level. Let's move on. Renee, you run a top producing real estate team powered by EXP. It's one of the, among the largest national brokerages. I know that you've developed comprehensive strategies around listings and marketing and handling them. This settlement is raising the possibility that listing agents might get contacted by unrepresented buyers more often than they have in the past. It's one possibility. It could be at an open house, or it could be a showing request. How are you going to coach your agents to handle these new listing challenges? Yes, I gave you a real softball here.
Okay, nothing like diving right in. Hi everyone, good to see everyone. This is a very big room of people staring at you. But anyways, I think, Ryan's sentiment, I think luckily in North Carolina, we're ahead of the curve, right? We've been able to already have good agreements in place and those type of things. Obviously, the practical, approach is going to be much different, I think, as we move forward. But specifically with open houses, that is a service that you are offering your seller. And there's not any issue with you hosting a house, open house or anything like that on behalf of the seller. And actually, NCAR also put out an opinion on that too. So there's a lot of resources out there to dig into, dive into, what is it, facts.realtor.com?
Just facts.realtor.
Or Realtor. There are a lot of different resources out there. So I think relying on your firms, your brokerages, and really diving deep into those things. I don't think any of us know exactly what this is going to look like. It might not look different, it might look a lot different. But as far as preparation on our side, really developing and continuing to hone in that buyer presentation. As a listing agent, we're always asking for compensation, right? It's just, I think on the buyer side, it's been a little bit different mentality over the years that, we've always been compensated through the seller. Obviously there's different situations that come up, but I think it's being able to really convey your value, what you are going to offer very clearly, to a potential consumer. So I think, lots of little changes happening, but not anything at least massive for us in our group.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the takeaway there is kind of have to take it as it comes to a large extent.
And I think, I will make one point, the one thing I do appreciate about real estate brokers is we are a resilient group of people. We deal with a lot of things day in and day out. It is a hard business. And I think as long as we can stay positive, be able to educate our clients, because there's a lot of misinformation, I do think ultimately the people that want to work with us will see our value.
Absolutely.
Can I just go off script and add something?
Sure, go for it.
The point you made about if you're in an open house, the buyer can see the house. I think that's an important thing it's one of the questions that I just hear a lot of is like, okay, we have to get this, everybody that walks into the open house sign an agreement. In case there's anybody out here that's confused about it, no, you don't. Anytime you're showing the house on behalf of the seller, when you're the listing agent, you don't have to, the settlement doesn't change anything for you in that case. You can show the house, even if you get a phone call, or a sign call for your listing, you can go show that house without getting the buyer to sign anything, per the terms of the settlement. So that is an important distinction. Now, if you are showing a house with the intent of working with that buyer, it is different, right? Even though they haven't agreed to work with you yet, you are showing it to work with them. That's a different scenario, but when you're doing it on behalf of the seller, that's it. Blanket statement, you don't have to have them sign anything.
And that has been a point that we've gotten a lot of questions on too, a lot of confusion on that. Let's move, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that article, I think, did a great job, driving that point home, along with also, reiterating the importance of working with real estate agents brochure, at the point that you're talking about, any confidential information.
Let's move to the lending world. And I'm so glad that we have a lender up here because, we don't think about all the other parts of the real estate industry that are gonna be impacted. It is gonna impact everything in one way or another. So Nelda, you are an executive vice president at Atlantic Bay, a large mortgage lender. The NAR settlement, it's far-reaching, it's affecting all the states. It's gonna impact all areas of real estate. What changes can we expect to see in the mortgage lending industry as a result of the settlement?
So there's really a few things that have happened, and lenders, of course, immediately got questions right away about what are you going to do to help? How can you fix it? What are you going to do? And so part of that is, okay, let's figure out how we can help. But as many of you know, we are one of the most regulated industries, in the world. And so things that happen for us happen in a quasi-governmental situation. So everything that's kind of coming down comes from what is called GSEs, which are government securitized entities, and that's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and Ginnie Mae, which is the government VA and FHA loans. So what we immediately did is heard everyone speaking about know your value, understand your value, speak to your value. And because we are partnered so closely with agents, lenders went through this in 2010 and 2011, by the way. Our compensation was completely questioned. We had to start putting things on the disclosure statement if you were a broker. So we went through this process of having our commission questioned and what to go through. We're also what I feel is a commoditized industry, right? What do we tell people? Shop for the best rate, which isn't always the best choice. So I think there's a really good opportunity here from a lender and agent to partner up. Some things I think you'll see, particularly are Atlantic Bay has created a seller success program. So to your point, you mentioned what happens with the listing agent, will consumers be drawn to the listing agent thinking, well, I can't pay a buyer's agent, so I need to go talk to the listing or FSBOs. We've created a whole template, almost a script book for a listing agent to use with the seller that says, here's what an agent can do for you. Here's how the lender's involved. Before you lower the price, this is what you should think about. Here's what seller concessions are. So we immediately flew into action to talk about what seller concessions can do and how they can work and how they can be put into the transaction. How many of you have been through one buying cycle, like 2018 or before? Because for most, if you're newer in this buying cycle, sellers haven't been wanting to give anything, right? So you have sellers who do not feel they're in a position to need to pay anything to help a buyer out, exacerbated on, oh, now I'm also may not pay commission too, or I may not have to. We've immediately started working with agents and teaching them, which we're gonna have a QR code. It's not on the one that's already out here. We'll have a QR code that has a grid that shows you what seller concession, what's the max amount you can pay, and then we can also talk about also buyer's agent commissions are not included in that number. So we'll get to that too, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I could like make this whole thing about lenders and what lenders can do to help, but we are prepared to help.
That's great, that's great. Let's go ahead and stay on lending since we kind of have gotten on that topic. So one concern that we have heard just a lot of agents raise, is those agents that love their VA and FHA buyers, right? Yes, we all love their buyers. And as you know, FHA and VA buyers, because they're participating in those programs, traditionally they've had a lot more restrictions on what fees they can pay at closing. So how are FHA and VA buyers in particular going to be impacted, and what's going to happen with this class of buyers?
So the first initial fight was for the VA buyer because the VA has had a rule that says the veteran cannot pay any commission at all, even if it's agreed upon. And so evidently legislation has done a very good job at getting to the VA. You guys have done a very good job with the grassroots efforts. Trade organizations for lenders have done a good job at getting in front of legislators to have a temporary amendment to that. So the veteran will not be harmed in not being allowed to pay that commission. FHA and conventional, so all lending, USDA, FHA, VA, and conventional are all allowed to allow the buyer to pay that commission. However, I think we do need to look at, and I lived in Apex for a couple of years during COVID, so I specifically can speak to the FHA buyer and the VA buyer. At that time, when rates were 3%, they were being hurt by, that's a government loan, that's not gonna be as good a loan for this buyer to have, right? I will tell you, just to take that away, it's the easiest loan for a buyer to get approved. So take that off the table, and hopefully we can teach sellers and agents, we can get you guys confident in what happens there. Where I think they're gonna be impacted is, so it's great that they can pay it now, but I want you to think about an active duty veteran. I've worked in the Jacksonville, Camp Lejeune market for about 10 years. Most veterans, especially active duty, have $0 to go to closing. The main reason they're buying is because it's gonna be more expensive to rent than buy. And putting a first month's deposit down and security deposit and rent is more expensive than just making the closing costs. So, yes, the veteran can pay. Where I think they may be hurt is the assumption that they should pay or can pay. For FHA, it's the same. So now we've got, yes, they can pay. So if you have a seller who's just not willing to pay, we'll say, well, they can pay it. However, we're in a rate environment where, as you guys know, first-time home buyers have been knocked out of the market, and that is your FHA or your VA buyer who has little to no money down. So you're thinking, if the buyer came to you and said, I'm ready to go, we have 3.5% or we have 5% to go, and they're expecting the seller to pay closing costs, and if that does happen, then the seller doesn't pay the commission on top of that, they're still back out with $0 or zero money to pay. So the other thing is the perception on the seller's part that they're just not as strong as a buyer, and so knocking them out altogether. So all of the loan entities will allow them to pay, and all of the loan entities will allow if you were to ask for it as a seller concession because the seller did not want to pay, are allowed to pay.
So just so we're clear, the lenders are ready to continue to close FHA and VA loans even after the implementation of the settlement?
Yes.
Okay, that is what we wanted to hear. I know there's been
I
a
think
lot
the
of...
VA rule, I believe it is open on August 10th, I believe. But yes, lenders are ready, and we'll just have to kind of help people get through that.
Okay, and I'm sure that comes with a big relief, because there's been a lot of agents who've been very concerned about these classes of buyers.
Mm-hmm.
Since we're talking about the effect of the settlement, not just on brokerage, but on other areas, let's turn now to real estate closings. So David, you're a managing attorney at a busy closing office in Clayton. So obviously you are up close with all facets of the closing process on a daily basis. How is the NAR settlement going to impact real estate closings?
So, from our perspective, as the closing attorney, there's gonna be changes, but not seismic changes. So we've always in the past, we've had to show, the broker commission on the settlement statement as part of that closing process. You're going to, as realtors, you're gonna have to communicate to us now, who's paying, how much are they paying, and give us some details. And that's not just from the listing side, that's from the buyer side as well. Because you may have a listing agreement where there's no compensation being offered, and so there's the seller is paying their broker only, or if they're unrepresented, they don't have a broker. You may have a buyer that is paying some or all, and so you're going to have to communicate to the closing attorney as a buyer's agent. This is the amount that I'm being paid, and this is who's paying. Because it's possible that maybe a portion of it is coming from the seller, and the rest is coming from the buyer. So those are things to be on the lookout for. That's probably the biggest change that you would see on the settlement statement, and kind of the lead up to closings. Whenever you get those info sheets, particularly from our office, as a buyer's agent, it's going to ask you, who's paying. And so I think that's probably the biggest change that we would see at the closing table.
Can I add to that? I think you may hear that or see that from the lender as well. We're just not sure how that's going to shake out yet, because as you go back to the CFPB in 2010, when things started to change in the closing disclosure, which used to be a GFE, we are on the hook for quoting certain boxes, and they must be exact. So I'm going to give you an example. Transfer taxes are customarily paid by the seller, right? Until we got into new construction land, and the end builder said, well, let's just transfer this over to the buyer's side. If the lender does not appropriately put that it's on the buyer's side, the lender then is forced to cure that and pay it. in full. So, which, by the way, I hear everyone talking about margins. We have margins too, and they're very, very thin, just like yours are. So in that same reference, I'm not sure yet, you may know, I'm not sure yet if the lender's gonna be on the hook for buyer signed the buyer's agency, buyer is going to pay the buyer's agency. Does the lender need to know how much the buyer's agency is in the beginning so that we can at least appropriately quote it on a loan estimate and a closing disclosure? Even if something changes down the road and the seller does pay, or there's some conglomerate of how it gets paid, I would just, we don't know how that shakes out yet because we haven't seen the documents. We don't know what the new documents are or how we're gonna go about it, but it is possible that the lender might also ask for the buyer's agency up front to understand how that may shake out on the LE, because if we've got to qualify a borrower on total amount of funds available, we need to make sure that that's there. And certainly, we're gonna be on the hook for whether disclosed properly as well. So it could be good, it could be bad, we just don't know how that will shake out.
The headaches of preparing a loan estimate, I'm so glad that I'm not a lender.
I'm gonna be thankful for my compliance department, that's on somebody else's desk.
Yeah, and you don't have to worry about that.
And I'm gonna circle back to that for just a second. I know most of you probably work with brokerages where they're gonna check your settlement statement to make sure that your amount that you were paid lines up with what your agency agreement is. It's my understanding MLS is gonna start auditing buyer's agency agreements. They're looking to see, one, was there an agency agreement that was in place prior to you showing a house to a buyer? So you need to be cognizant of that. But it's also a situation where, you know, part of the settlement is you can't accept compensation above and beyond what's been agreed to with the buyer. And so, you know, you need to have something in writing in place that shows that you are able to accept compensation that you are being offered.
Let's go ahead, turn back to Brian. One of the themes that we are hearing is about the uncertainty ahead. So I'm sure that you must be getting a lot of questions about this. So since we have uncertainty about what the standard practices are going to be moving forward, how do you advise agents to handle this period of uncertainty?
Well, let me just quickly tag on to also what they're saying about the enforcement of compliance of this stuff. I mean, one of the questions I get is, well, who's gonna supervise this? Who's gonna enforce this stuff? How's anybody gonna know if I had this document signed, this, you know, showing agreement or whatever signed? I said, well, probably your brokerage for one, because we're protected under the terms of the settlement, so we don't wanna open ourselves up to liability. Sounds like maybe the MLS might check on that. There could be other forces that are out checking on that. So there are people that have vested interest in making sure that the terms of the settlement, once approved, are complied with. It's not like, oh, I can do this and nobody's gonna know. There are people that are gonna care to know. So as far as the uncertainty goes, I think it's important, you know, all this is conceptual when it comes to uncertainty. The unknown is harder than the known. My sense is that agents just want to know how to move forward so that they can do it. And unfortunately, nobody up here can give them that absolute certainty. So I think it's conceptual that agents need to understand we're all playing in the same sandbox here. There are going to be buyer agents and listing agents on August 16th, and there are going to be buyer agents and listing agents on August 17th, and there will be new ways that we work together and new communications that we have that we've never had before, right? You're going to get a phone call from an agent asking you a question that you've never gotten before. And how you respond to that as a listing agent or a buyer's agent is going to determine how easy this transition is. We need to get along. I am in charge of a fairly large brokerage, and so I get to hear about all the times where agents aren't getting along. And I think we need to reduce that, right? Like, you can represent the best interest of your client and be on one side of the fence, and the other side represent their client's best interests. And the agents can still actually get along in the transaction. And the rapport that we have, the relationships we have with the agents in the marketplace are just going to become more important, because if an agent, if you're, let's just say, for example, your seller is not offering compensation proactively, and buyer agent calls you and says, hey, is your seller offering compensation? And you say no. and that buyer agent blows up on you and acts as though it's your fault, right? Like, if you then blow up on them, like, that's not moving towards where we need to go. So we all need to be understanding that we're navigating a new environment. Let's do it together. The market will shake out. Like, again, the market forces will do what they do, right? There's economic principles at play here that will help figure out how to do all of this. We just need to play nice together and realize we aren't enemies. Like, we don't have to win. Like, us winning doesn't mean the other side has to lose, right? So I think that's just conceptually, we need to understand that moving forward. And then I would say lean into your brokerage for guidance on how to do this, your broker in charge, other leadership. Be involved in as many conversations as you can at this level and with people that you respect and that have, you know, relevant information to share, not on national Facebook groups where you have agents who are battling something that we have no idea what it's like, right? You're in a state where they didn't have buyer agency before, and now you not only have to have them sign something, you have to have them sign buyer agency, and you've never had to do that before. Like, of course, they have more gripes than we have, but don't get sucked into their job, right? So stay present here with what we're dealing with. I assure you it's gonna be a lot easier than what they're dealing with. And the website that Renee mentioned, Realtor, I realize it is my job to stay on top of this, so I talk, have conversations with people every day, I'm reading articles every day, I'm on that website every day because the FAQ is so long, there's so much information. But you have to take it upon yourself to educate yourself on this, because you're going to get questions that you weren't prepared for, right? You should be role-playing and practicing, well, how am I gonna answer a consumer when they say, oh, I heard I don't have to pay commission now. Yes, you're gonna need a response to that, right? That's a pretty simple one that you're gonna need a response to. A seller saying, why should I offer buyer agent compensation? That's a question you should already have answered in your head, right? But you're gonna get questions that you don't have the answer to, that you haven't thought of yet. And being well-versed in our contracts, you know, knowing them forwards and backwards, and being up to date on the latest of the settlement and hearing perspectives of people that do pay attention to this a lot, getting those perspectives and throwing those in your back pocket so you can pull them out when you get that unexpected question, I think becomes really important. So be prepared, be educated. That's how you can handle the uncertainty, because we can't wipe away the uncertainty, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, we can't.
Nathan, I'm gonna jump in here as well as the social media stuff, because there's plenty of people that have, they get their realtor's license or they get their law degree from, you know, YouTube, and they practice in the Facebook courts, and they put out some really bad information. I've seen some stuff out there floating around. I'm just gonna get, you know, very creative with how I make my listing on the MLS. It's gonna, you know, wink and nod and communicate to you what it is that I'm offering here. That is a terrible idea. Get yourself moved off the MLS.
The DOJ is watching.
Yes, don't chum the waters. Sharks are already circling. All right, so do us a favor. Don't follow any advice you get on the social media sites like that, because I can assure you they're almost always, it's always bad advice.
So Renee, let's turn to you. Obviously, your team is going to be talking about this uncertainty. Everyone's really talking about that. So, how is your team addressing the situation where you're not sure what the standard practices are going to be?
Well, I mean, I think this is what's difficult, right? Uncertainty always makes everyone really uncomfortable. And it's like, can we just get here already to this, you know, August 17th date so we can just figure out what's going on? But I think, you know, again, being well integrated into the market, you know, making sure you're talking to individuals, you know, we're constantly kind of fleshing out, okay, well, how is this new way of doing things? I mean, one thing that comes up a lot is, you know, if you're in a situation where you have a long-term relationship with a client, that conversation is a lot easier than that person that just randomly calls you from an online ad or something like that. And I think that's where a lot of the concern lies for a lot of people is you don't have that established rapport with, you know, the random call-in, right? And everyone has obviously built their businesses differently. So with the team, you know, we obviously have our referral sources and then we have our paid resources, and figuring out what that standard of protocol with both of those are is different, right? And then, you know, making sure we are having the conversations. I'm the ridiculous one that likes to talk in the mirror and, you know, flesh out, like, what is this, you know, kind of, I call it the 2-minute conversation or elevator pitch going to look like, to make sure that you are able to convey what you need to concisely. and articulate it well, right? I mean, I think this will really test a lot of our communication. But even like, how do we disseminate this information about the commission or compensation potentially offered to, you know, the agents, because that could be a logistical nightmare, right? Like, you have a home with 40 showings on it one weekend. I don't want to have to like get, you know, I mean, that's a lot of, you know, manpower to make sure that you're communicating with all those people. And you guys all know how difficult that's been over the last few years. So I think keeping those open lines of communication open. Another thing that's come up, and I'm sure this has probably come up with your firm too, is do we have a minimum floor, right? I mean, all of these different things come up, like, do you start charging your retainer fee? You know, there's, you know, I think there'll be a lot of creative approaches to this, some that will work really well, some that won't. And I think just keeping an open mind and knowing that we do, I mean, it's probably gonna be daily changes as we move forward. But you know, someone made a good point yesterday at a panel I was at, is that ultimately the buyer is the one bringing the money to the table. The seller has no proceeds without a buyer, right? And so I think we forget that as the buyer, they do have some power. And you know, our market is not a COVID market anymore. Our market, I think, is a little bit more normalized. I mean, there's the weird one-offs every other direction, but I think as our market changes, so will the arrogance of, you know, sellers and things like that, where they recognize that there will be a need, you know, for that. So, you know, I think it's just practicing, you know, what you're going to say. My dad is a great champion of, you know, adversity with conversation, smart man, and so he has challenged me quite a bit and, you know, really forced me to, you know, be able to articulate things really well, right? Because I think, like most of us in this room, we have a very smart buyer pool here. And again, I think if you're able to convey that value, I mean, we've had two recent situations where we had a client that already owned land, but they wanted representation during the build process, and it was an easy conversation, truthfully. I mean, it was funny how it was kind of before all this shook out, and it was an easy conversation, right? So I think the more we're having that type of conversation, asking for that compensation on the buying side, it will get easier.
So Nelda, let's get back to the lending world here for a second. As you know, the NAR settlement expressly allows a seller to pay a seller concession. It also allows the seller to pay all or part of the buyer's commission. An agent does not want to put together a deal or a sales contract only to have, before closing, hear the news that, oh, the lender won't allow that credit. We hate to hear that, right?
Yeah.
So, are there any lending restrictions on what a seller can pay? And can you also please explain what is meant by an interested party contribution, which is a term we're hearing a lot more lately?
Right. So interested, one of the reasons I asked earlier how many of you have been through a different buying cycle where it was a buyer's market and buyers could ask for anything because there was enough inventory, is because seller concessions or interested party concessions were very commonplace. It was common to ask for $3,000, $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 to be part of the seller giving for the buyer to cover closing costs. So an interested party is anyone who benefits from the transaction giving something in relation to the transaction to help the buyer pay buyer's costs associated with the transaction. So that's anything from any lender fees to attorney fees. It could go to prepaid, so any fee that's associated with the transaction. Up until recently, buyer's agency commission was not included because we know it was customary. So the ruling was that buyer's agency commission will not be included in these percentages that are allowed by the interested party. So an interested party is a realtor, a developer, a builder, could be the lender, but lenders you'll find don't have margin to give the percentages that are available. But so what will happen is there's going to be a grid. Rylan will make sure we get it out to you. But we have a grid that says if you're buying a primary residence, if you're buying a second home, if you're buying an investment property, if you're using VA, how much can the seller pay? So how I envision this, again, I haven't seen the documents, but before you would just say, oh, closing costs are $7,500, ask for a seller concession of $7,500, put that in the line there, we're good to go. What it might look like now is the seller is not giving a concession, but they are willing to give a concession towards the agency commission. That number would just still go in that block. Or maybe the seller says, I'm giving $2,500, maybe they advertise they'll give $2,500 plus whatever the buyer's commission is, or they don't proactively offer, so the buyer negotiates that and the seller agrees, that could also be put in that block. If they wanted it as a concession, I'm assuming you could also change the agreements, however the agreements are gonna be written, and there will be a place that's written that says now the seller will pay, as opposed they did not proactively pay before and have a commission. So it can go in that block. It can also come back to the buyer's agency agreement and listing agreement to say who's gonna pay. What I will tell you is that I believe good local lenders are ready to help you decide how to do that, and how to make sure it gets in the contract. We're not gonna be deal killers. We're looking for ways to help. Trust me, we want as many buyers as you guys do. We don't get paid until you get paid, until we don't get paid and they get in the home. So we're very much interested in how do we keep the home buying process and the American dream moving forward the way it should be. So it's hard enough as it is. So we're gonna find ways to make it work.
And that again, the theme I keep hearing from everybody.
Yeah.
It will work, we will get through it.